Administering Microsoft Azure SQL Solutions DP-300 real updated questions are valid for you to take and pass the test easily. Share some Microsoft DP-300 real updated questions here. 1. You have an Azure SQL database named SQL-DB1. You need to minimize the possibility of query store transitioning to a read-only state. What should you do? A. Have the value of data flush interval. B. Double the value of statistics collection interval. C. Have the value of statistics collection interval. D. Double the value of data flush interval. 2. You have an Azure SQL database. You identify a long-running query. You need to identify which operation in the query is causing the performance issue. What should you use to display the query execution plan in Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio, SSMS? A. Live query statistics. B. An estimated execution plan. C. An actual execution plan. D. Client statistics. 3. You have a VERSION 8.0 Azure database for MySQL database. You need to identify which database queries consume the most resources. Which tool should you use? A. Query store. B. Metrics. C. Query performance insight. D. Alerts. 4. You plan to move two 100 GB databases to Azure. You need to dynamically scale resources consumption based on workloads. The solution must minimize downtime during scaling operations. What should you use? A. An Azure SQL database elastic pool. B. SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machines. C. An Azure SQL database managed instance. D. Azure SQL databases. 5. You have 10 Azure virtual machines that have SQL Server installed. You need to implement a backup strategy to ensure that you can restore specific databases to other SQL Server instances. The solution must provide centralized management of the backups. What should you include in the backup strategy? A. Automated backup in the SQL virtual machine settings. B. Azure backup. C. Azure site recovery. D. SQL Server agent jobs. 6. You are building a database backup solution for a SQL Server database hosted on an Azure virtual machine. In the event of an Azure regional outage, you need to be able to restore the database backups. The solution must minimize costs. Which type of storage accounts should you use for the backups? A. Locally redundant storage, LRS. B. Read access geo-redundant storage, RAW-GRS. C. Zone redundant storage, ZRS. D. Geo-redundant storage. 7. You have SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machines in an availability group. You have a database named DB1 that is not in the availability group. You create a full database backup of DB1. You need to add DB1 to the availability group. Which restore option should you use on the secondary replica? A. Restore with recovery. B. Restore with no recovery. C. Restore with standby. 8. You have an Azure SQL database named DB1. You need to ensure that DB1 will support automatic failover without data loss if a datacenter fails. The solution must minimize costs. Which deployment option and pricing tier should you configure? A. Azure SQL Database Hyperscale. B. Azure SQL Database Managed Instance General Purpose. C. Azure SQL Database Premium. D. Azure SQL Database Basic. 9. You have 40 Azure SQL databases, each for a different customer. All the databases reside on the same Azure SQL database server. You need to ensure that each customer can only connect to and access their respective database. Which two actions should you perform? Each correct answer presents part of the solution. Note: each correct selection is worth 1 point. A. Implement row-level security, RLS. B. Create users in each database. C. Configure the database firewall. D. Configure the server firewall. E. Create logins in the master database. F. Implement always encrypted. 10. You have 50 Azure SQL databases. You need to notify the database owner when the database settings, such as the database size and pricing tier, are modified in Azure. What should you do? A. Create a diagnostic setting for the activity log that has the security log enabled. B. For the database, create a diagnostic setting that has the instance and app advanced metric enabled. C. Create an alert rule that uses a metric signal type. D. Create an alert rule that uses an activity log signal type.